I used to believe that family meant safety, that blood was thicker than greed. But at 72 years old, lying in a hospital bed with surgical staples holding my abdomen together, I learned that some people will divide your belongings before your heart stops beating. The morphine made everything soft around the edges, but not soft enough to dull the conversation I overheard outside my door. My own children haggling over my possessions like vultures circling a carcass that wasn't even cold yet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, and 3 days ago I went under the knife for what the doctors called routine gallbladder surgery. Routine. What a joke. At my age, nothing involving general anesthesia is routine, but I didn't have much choice. The pain had been gnawing at me for months, sharp and relentless, like someone was driving a hot poker through my ribs every time I ate. My daughter Sarah kept insisting I was being dramatic, that I just needed to eat better and stop complaining. My son Michael barely acknowledged my complaints at all, too busy with his tech startup to worry about his aging mother's digestive issues. But when I collapsed in my kitchen last Tuesday morning, clutching the counter as waves of agony rolled through me, even they couldn't ignore it anymore. The paramedics said my gallbladder was inflamed to the point of rupture. Emergency surgery, they said. No time to wait. I remember Sarah's face in the hospital corridor before they wheeled me into the operating room, not concern exactly, but something calculating. She kept asking the surgeon about recovery times, about complications, about what would happen if... She never finished that sentence, but I heard it hanging in the air like smoke. Michael stood behind her, scrolling through his phone, occasionally looking up to nod at whatever Sarah was saying. Even then, drugged and scared, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital air conditioning. The surgery went well, according to Dr. Peterson. Laparoscopic, minimally invasive, they removed the troublesome organ through 4 small incisions that would heal cleanly. I'd be back on my feet in a week, back to normal in a month. What he didn't mention was how long it would take for the betrayal to heal, if it ever would. I woke up Thursday evening to the sound of hushed voices outside my room. The nurses had left an hour ago. Visiting hours were nearly over, but I could hear my children talking in the hallway. At first, I felt a warm flutter of gratitude. They were staying late, worried about me, keeping vigil while I recovered. How wrong I was. Already talked to the lawyer, Sarah was saying, her voice barely above a whisper but sharp with excitement. He said as long as we have the power of attorney documents, we can start the process immediately. What about the house? Michael's voice, usually confident and commanding in his business dealings, sounded nervous. Mom's not exactly... she could live for another 10 years. The house is the easy part, Sarah replied, and I could hear papers rustling. I've already been in touch with a realtor. The market's hot right now, especially for properties. In her neighborhood. We could get at least $800,000, maybe more if we stage it right. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. They were talking about selling my house. The house where I'd raised them. Where their father and I had built a life together over 37 years of marriage before cancer took him 5 years ago. The house where I'd nursed them through childhood illnesses, helped with homework at the kitchen table, taught Sarah to bake Christmas cookies and shown Michael how to change a tire in the driveway. But what if she wakes up and fights us on this? Michael asked. You know how stubborn she can be. Sarah's laugh was cold, dismissive. Mom's 72, Mike. She just had major surgery. The doctor said there could be complications, infections, blood clots, cognitive issues from the anesthesia. If we move fast enough, by the time she's thinking clearly again, it'll all be done. Besides, we're doing this for her own good. She can't maintain that big house forever, and assisted living isn't cheap. Assisted living. They'd already decided my fate, mapped out my future without so much as asking what I wanted. I lay there in the narrow hospital bed, tethered to machines, and IV lines, feeling more helpless than I had since I was a child. But underneath the helplessness, something else was growing. A cold, hard anger that burned brighter than any surgical pain. "What about the investment accounts?" Michael asked. "And the life insurance policies?" "I've got copies of everything," Sarah said. "The IRA has about 400,000, the savings account has another 120, and there's the certificate of deposit that matured last month, another 50,000 she hasn't touched. Plus the life insurance, but we can't touch that until..." "Until what?" Michael pressed. There was a pause, long and loaded with implications I didn't want to understand. "Until we don't need to worry about it anymore," Sarah said finally. "But for now, we focus on what we can access. I've already filled out the paperwork to add both our names to her accounts. The power of attorney makes it legal." Power of attorney. I remembered signing those documents 2 years ago when my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, had a stroke and her children struggled to manage her affairs. Sarah had been so persuasive, so caring. "Just in case, Mom," she'd said. "You never know what could happen, and this way, if you're ever in the hospital or unable to make decisions, we can take care of everything for you." She'd made it sound like protection, like love. I'd signed the papers thinking I was being responsible, thinking I was making things easier for them if something happened to me. I never imagined they'd use those documents against me while I was unconscious on an operating table. "The car's probably worth 20,000, Sarah continued, her voice getting closer to my door. "And there's some jewelry, Mom's wedding ring, grandmother's pearls. Nothing spectacular, but it all adds up." "What about the business?" Michael asked. "The antique shop's been closed since Dad died, but there's still inventory in the back room." "I drove by yesterday," Sarah said. "The building itself is leased, but there's definitely stuff worth selling. Mom never had the heart to deal with it after Dad passed. Probably 30,000 worth of furniture and collectibles gathering dust. The antique shop. My husband Charles had run that little store for 20 years, carefully curating pieces, with history and character, building relationships with customers who became friends. After he died, I couldn't bear to go back, couldn't face the empty space where his laugh used to echo among the old furniture and vintage finds. I'd paid the lease to keep it exactly as he'd left it, like a shrine to our shared dreams. To them, it was just more inventory to liquidate. "So what's the total?" Michael asked. I heard papers shuffling again. "House, 800,000. Accounts and CDs, 570,000. Car, jewelry, and business inventory, maybe another, 50 to 60,000. We're looking at close to $1.5 million. $1.5 million. They'd reduced my entire life to a number, a sum to be divided between them like they were splitting a restaurant bill. Every morning I'd spent tending the garden Charles planted. Every evening I'd spent reading in the chair by the window where I could watch the neighborhood children play. Every memory soaked into those walls. None of it mattered. It was just real estate to them, just assets to be converted into cash." "When do we start?" Michael asked. "I'm meeting with the realtor tomorrow morning," Sarah said. "And I have an appointment with the bank on Monday to transfer the accounts. We need to move fast, Mike. The longer we wait, the more chance there is for complications." Complications, that's what I was to them now. A complication in their financial planning. Their voices began to fade as they walked toward the elevator. But I caught Sarah's final words. "By the time Mom gets out of here, everything will be taken care of. She'll thank us eventually." I lay in the darkness of my hospital room, the steady beep of the heart monitor marking time like a countdown clock. The surgical pain in my abdomen felt like nothing compared to the ache spreading through my chest. These were the children I'd sacrificed for, the babies I'd walked the floors with during endless colicky nights, the toddlers I'd potty trained, and the teenagers I'd waited up for when they missed curfew. I'd paid for Sarah's college education and her wedding, helped Michael start his first business with a loan he'd never repaid. When Charles died, they'd both been too busy with their own lives to help me plan the funeral or sort through his belongings. I'd done it all alone, grief-stricken and overwhelmed, but I'd understood. They had their own families to worry about, their own responsibilities. What I hadn't understood was that they saw me as a burden to be managed, an asset to be harvested. The night stretched on endlessly. Nurses came and went, checking my vital signs and adjusting my medications, but I barely noticed them. My mind was spinning, trying to process what I'd heard, trying to figure out how my own children could be so cold, so calculating. Had they always been this way? Had I been blind to their true nature, or had they changed somewhere along the way? I thought about Sarah's childhood, how she'd always been the organizer, the planner. Even at 8 years old, she'd had a careful, methodical way of approaching problems. I'd thought it was a strength, this practical nature of hers. She'd grown up to be a successful real estate agent, married to a banker, living in a house twice the size of mine with a swimming pool and a 3-car garage. But somewhere along the way, that practical nature had hardened into something else, something that could look at her mother lying in a hospital bed and see only dollar signs. And Michael, my baby boy, who'd been so sweet and imaginative as a child. He'd built elaborate Lego cities and spent hours drawing fantastical creatures in the margins of his school notebooks. That creativity had served him well in the tech world, where his app development company was finally starting to turn, a real profit after years of struggle. But the gentle boy who used to bring me dandelions picked from the yard had grown into a man who could discuss dividing my estate like he was negotiating a business deal. When had they stopped seeing me as their mother and started seeing me as their inheritance? Dawn crept through the hospital window, gray and uninviting. Dr. Peterson made his morning rounds, pronouncing my recovery excellent and promising I could go home by the weekend. Home. The word felt hollow now, knowing that my children were already planning to sell it out from under me. I smiled and nodded at the doctor's optimistic predictions, but inside, I was calculating just as coldly as Sarah and Michael had been in the hallway. They thought they were so clever, moving quickly, while I was weak and vulnerable. They thought the power of attorney gave them unlimited control over my life and my assets. They thought I was just a confused old woman who would be grateful for their help once it was all over. They were about to learn how wrong they were. By Friday morning, my strength was returning along with my resolve. The surgical pain was manageable with regular medication, and my mind was clearer than it had been in months. Maybe it was the shock of betrayal, or maybe it was simply the relief of finally seeing my children's true nature, but I felt more focused and determined than I had in years. The discharge process took most of the morning. Paperwork, instructions for wound care, prescriptions to be filled. Sarah arrived to take me home, all smiles and concerned questions about my pain levels and dietary restrictions. She'd brought flowers, yellow roses that she arranged carefully in a vase by my bedside, while chattering about how glad she was that I was feeling better. "I know this has been scary, Mom," she said, adjusting the blanket around my legs with what looked like genuine tenderness. "But you're going to be fine. Better than fine, actually. Michael and I have been talking and we think this might be a good time for you to consider some changes." Changes? I kept my voice neutral, curious. "Well, the house is getting to be a lot for you to manage, isn't it? All those stairs, the yard work, the maintenance. And after a health scare like this?" She trailed off, shaking her head with manufactured concern. "We just want you to be safe, Mom. To be somewhere where you don't have to worry about taking care of everything yourself." There it was, the opening argument for the case they'd already decided. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering her words. For the first time. "What did you have in mind?" Sarah's eyes lit up with the gleam of a salesperson closing a deal. "There's a lovely assisted living community about 20 minutes from my house, Sunset Manor. They have activities, meal service, nursing staff available around the clock. You'd have your own apartment, but with all the support you need. That sounds expensive, I said mildly. Don't worry about that, Sarah said quickly. Michael and I have looked into the finances. If we sell the house and consolidate your other assets, there's more than enough to cover the costs. You could live there comfortably for the rest of for many years. For the rest of my life, she'd almost said. The rest of my life in a facility while they spent the proceeds from selling everything Charles and I had worked for. I wondered how much of that $1.5 million would actually make it to Sunset Manor, and how much would end up funding Sarah's next home renovation or Michael's business expansion. I'd like to think about it, I said. Of course, Sarah agreed too eagerly. Take all the time you need. But in the meantime, maybe we should start getting some paperwork in order, just to make the transition easier when you're ready. I've already been in touch with a few people who can help. I'll bet you have, I thought, but I just smiled and nodded. You're so thoughtful, Sarah. I don't know what I'd do without you and Michael. The ride home was filled with Sarah's cheerful chatter about my recovery, about how well I looked considering what I'd been through, about how excited she was to help me explore my options. I watched the familiar neighborhoods pass by the car window and wondered if this would be one of the last times I'd see them. If Sarah had her way, I'd be installed in Sunset Manor within a month, my house sold, my independence dissolved into monthly payments for institutional care. But Sarah didn't know about the conversation I'd overheard. She thought she was managing. A confused, vulnerable old woman who would be grateful for guidance. She had no idea that I'd heard every word of their calculating discussion, that I knew exactly what they were planning. She also had no idea what I was planning in return when We pulled into my driveway. I felt a surge of fierce possessiveness looking at my house. It was a modest 2-story colonial, painted white with blue shutters, surrounded by the garden Charles and I had planted together over the years. The oak tree in the front yard had grown from a sapling we'd brought home from the nursery when Sarah was 10. The rose bushes along the walkway were cuttings from my mother's garden, carried on through 3 generations. Every board, every brick, every blade of grass held memories that couldn't be liquidated into a real estate transaction. Sarah helped me up the front steps, her hand gentle on my elbow, her voice full of concern. Are you sure you're feeling strong? Enough to be alone tonight. I could stay over, sleep on the couch. I'll be fine, I assured her. I just need to rest. Well, if you need anything at all, just call. Promise me you'll call if you feel dizzy or nauseous, or if the pain gets worse, I promised, and she kissed my cheek before leaving. I watched her drive away, then slowly made my way inside. The house felt different somehow. Not just because I'd been gone for a few days, but because I now knew it was under siege. My sanctuary had become a target. My refuge had become contested territory. But I wasn't defenseless. Not yet. I made my way to the study where Charles used to pay bills and manage our finances. His old wooden desk still held neat stacks of papers, exactly as I'd left them before my emergency surgery. Bank statements, investment reports, insurance policies. All the documents that Sarah and Michael thought they could access with their power of attorney. What they didn't know was that the power of attorney had limitations. What they didn't know was that I'd learned a few things about protecting assets during the 5 years since Charles died, when various helpful people had tried to convince me to make smart financial decisions that would have benefited them, more than me. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and started making a list. Not a list of my assets, like the one Sarah had been working from in the hospital hallway, but a list of phone calls I needed to make, people I needed to talk to, actions I needed to take. The children thought they'd caught me sleeping, but I was wide awake now. And I was about to show them exactly what a 72-year-old woman could accomplish when she stopped being polite and started being ruthless. The first call would be to my attorney on Monday morning. The second would be to the bank. And the third, well, the third call was going to be the most satisfying one of all. But first, I needed to rest and let my body heal. I had work to do, and I was going to need all my strength for what came next. Sarah and Michael had made their move while they thought I was helpless. Now it was my turn. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that makes everything seem possible. I'd spent the weekend resting, healing, and planning. By Sunday evening, my surgical pain had dulled to a manageable ache, but my resolve had sharpened to a razor's edge. Sarah had called twice to check on me, her voice dripping with false concern, asking if I'd thought any more about our conversation. I told her I was still considering my options, which was true enough. I just didn't mention that my options had nothing to do with assisted living. At exactly 9 o'clock Monday morning, I called my attorney, Robert Hendricks. Robert had handled Charles's will and had been our family lawyer for over 15 years. He knew me, knew my children, and most importantly, knew exactly what that power of attorney document did and didn't allow them to do. Margaret, his voice, was warm with genuine concern when he heard about my surgery. "How are you feeling? Sarah mentioned you might need some help with estate planning." "Did she now?" I kept my tone light, conversational. "Robert, I need to ask you something confidential. If my children tried to use their power of attorney to access my accounts or sell my property while I'm mentally competent, what would happen?" There was a pause. "Margaret, are you having problems with Sarah and Michael?" "Let's just say I'm being cautious. Hypothetically speaking." "Hypothetically, if you're of sound mind and capable of making your own decisions, they can't override your wishes. The power of attorney is only valid if you're incapacitated. And any financial institution that allowed unauthorized access could face serious legal consequences." "What if they've already started the process?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Margaret, I think you should come in today. Can you drive?" "I'll be there in an hour." The drive to Robert's office gave me time to think. I'd lent Michael $50,000 3 years ago to keep his struggling business afloat. No promissory note, no formal agreement, just a mother helping her son in crisis. He'd promised to pay me back as soon as things turned around. His company was profitable now, but I'd never seen a penny of repayment. Sarah had borrowed my late mother's jewelry for her daughter's wedding 2 years ago. The pearls and diamond earrings were supposedly being kept safe in Sarah's deposit box until Emma was old enough to appreciate them. I'd never gotten them back. Now I understood. They hadn't been borrowing from me. They'd been taking early distributions on their inheritance. Robert's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, all dark wood and leather-bound legal volumes. He ushered me into his private office, his expression growing more serious as I told him about the conversation I'd overheard in the hospital. "They've already contacted a realtor about your house?" he asked, making notes on a yellow pad. "Sarah has an appointment this week. She thinks she can list it and have it sold before I'm fully recovered." "And they believe they can access your financial accounts?" "They have copies of statements. Sarah mentioned transferring everything to joint accounts." Robert shook his head, grimly. "Margaret, what they're planning is financial elder abuse. It's illegal and it's prosecutable, but we need to move quickly." For the next 2 hours, we worked methodically through my options. Robert made calls to my bank, my investment firm, and my insurance company, placing holds on all accounts and establishing password protection that only I could access. He contacted the realtor Sarah had mentioned, a mutual acquaintance, and made it clear that any attempt to list my property without my explicit written consent would result in immediate legal action. "Now," Robert said, leaning back in his leather chair, "let's talk about what you want to do long term." "I want them to understand consequences," I said simply. "They think they can manipulate me because I'm old and sick. They need to learn they're wrong." "What about your relationship with them?" "Once we take these steps, there's no going back." I thought about that for a moment. "Robert, My children decided to divide my estate while I was unconscious on an operating table. I think they ended our relationship before I did. By Tuesday afternoon, the first shots had been fired. Sarah called me, her voice tight with frustration. "Mom, there seems to be some kind of problem with the bank. They won't let me access your accounts to help you manage your bills." "Oh?" Kept my voice deliberately vague. "What kind of problem?" "They're saying I need additional authorization, even though I have power of attorney. It's so frustrating when you're just trying to help." "Maybe I should call them myself," I suggested. "Clear up the confusion." No, don't worry about it, I'll figure it out." But she couldn't figure it out, because there was nothing to figure out. The bank had been very clear. Margaret Chen was mentally competent and had explicitly revoked any third-party access to her accounts. Any further attempts to use the power of attorney would be reported to elder abuse authorities. Wednesday brought a visit from Michael. He arrived during lunch, looking harried and uncomfortable. "Mom, we need to talk." I invited him in, offered him coffee, and settled into my favorite armchair while he paced nervously around the living room. "Sarah says you've been uncooperative about getting some financial help set up." "Uncooperative?" I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "You know what I mean. The bank thing, the realtor thing. We're just trying to help you plan for the future." "What realtor thing, Michael?" He stopped pacing, realizing he'd said too much. "I just meant, eventually you might want to downsize." "Eventually," I agreed. "But not while I'm recovering from surgery. Not without discussing it with me first." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was caught in a lie. "Mom, we're worried about you. Living alone in this big house, managing all these finances by yourself. What if something happens?" "Something did happen," I said quietly. "I had surgery, and while I was unconscious, my children decided to sell my house and move me into assisted living without asking what I wanted." The color drained from his face. How did you—" "I heard you, Michael. Both of you. In the hospital hallway, dividing up my estate like I was already dead." He sank into Charles's old recliner, looking suddenly much younger than his 42 years. "Mom, it wasn't like that. We were just planning, being responsible." "Responsible?" I leaned forward, my voice sharp. "Responsible would be asking me what I want. Responsible would be waiting until I'm fully recovered to have these conversations. What you were doing was taking advantage of a sick old woman." "We need the money, Mom." The words came out in a rush, desperate and raw. "My business is leveraged to the hilt. Sarah's got 3 kids to put through college. We thought you wouldn't mind." "You thought I wouldn't find out." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What do you want from us?" "I want the $50,000 you borrowed 3 years ago. With interest." "Mom, you know I can't." "You can't?" I stood up, moving to the desk where I'd laid out printed copies of his business financial reports, public information, since his company had gone public last year. "Your company reported profits of over $2 million last quarter, Michael. You personally earned more in bonuses last month than most people make in a year. Don't tell me you can't afford to repay your mother. Those profits are all reinvested. Then, sell some stock, liquidate some assets, do whatever you have to do, but I want my money back by the end of the month. And if I don't?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then I call the mortgage company that holds the note on your house. The same house you used my $50,000 as a down payment for. I wonder what they'd think about their borrower using fraudulently obtained funds for his home purchase." His face went white. "You wouldn't. Try me." After Michael left, I sat in my quiet house and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. Not the power that comes from money or authority, but the power that comes from finally understanding your own worth and refusing to let others diminish it. Thursday brought Sarah, armed with pamphlets from Sunset Manor and a carefully rehearsed speech about quality of life in your golden years. I let her talk for 20 minutes, nodding politely as she described the facility's amenities, the social activities, the peace of mind that comes from professional care. "It sounds lovely," I said when she finished, "but I'm not interested." "Mom, you're not thinking clearly. The surgery, the medication, Sarah." My voice cut through her protests like a blade. "I heard you in the hospital. I know about the realtor, the bank accounts, all of it." Her face cycled through several expressions: surprise, calculation, defiance, and finally, anger. "So what if you did? We're your children. We're trying to take care of you." "By stealing from me?" "It's not stealing if it's going to be ours anyway." And there it was, the truth she'd been hiding behind all that false concern. In her mind, I was already dead. My money was already hers. I was just an inconvenient obstacle to accessing her inheritance. "I want my mother's jewelry back," I said calmly. "The pearls, the earrings, everything you took for Emma's wedding. Those are family heirlooms. They should stay in the family." "I am the family, Sarah. They're mine to give, and I choose to give them to someone who actually respects me." "You're being ridiculous, spiteful." "I'm being awake. For the first time in years, I'm seeing my children clearly, and I don't like what I see." She stood up, her real estate agent composure finally cracking completely. "Fine. Keep your house, keep your money, keep everything. But don't come crying to us when you're old and sick and alone." "I'm already old and sick," I said. "And after this week, I'd rather be alone." By Friday, both Sarah and Michael had blocked my phone number. They'd made their choice. If they couldn't have my money, they didn't want me either. It should have. Hurt more than it did, but mostly I felt relieved. The weight of trying to please ungrateful children, of pretending their disrespect was normal family friction, was finally off my shoulders. Robert helped me draft a new will. Sarah and Michael would still inherit, but only after my debts were paid, my wishes were honored, and several large charitable donations were made. The house would go to a local family shelter. My mother's jewelry would go to my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez's granddaughter, a sweet girl who visited me regularly and actually listened when I told stories about the past. Most importantly, I established a trust that would pay for my own care if I ever needed it, on my terms, in my home, for as long as possible. Sunset Manor would have to find other customers. 6 months later, I was tending Charles's roses when Mrs. Rodriguez came over with her mail. "Margaret, I think this was delivered to my box by mistake." It was a letter from Michael's mortgage company, a notice of foreclosure proceedings. I looked at the address, the house I'd helped him buy with my $50,000, and felt a twinge of something that might have been sadness. Then I folded the letter and threw it away. I'd given them every chance to do the right thing. They'd chosen greed over love, money over family. Now they could live with the consequences. That evening, I called Mrs. Rodriguez's granddaughter, Sophia. "Would you like to come over for dinner tomorrow? I have some stories to tell you about your great-grandmother's jewelry." Her voice was bright with excitement. "I'd love to, Mrs. Chen. Family, I realized, isn't about blood. It's about respect, about love freely given and gratefully received. It's about people who see your worth beyond what you can provide for them." I was 72 years old, and I was finally learning the difference. Epilogue. 2 years have passed since my surgery, since my children showed their true colors in that hospital hallway. I'm 74 now, healthy and content in the house Charles and I built together. The garden is flourishing, my oil painting class has become a source of real joy, and Sophia visits twice a week to hear stories and help with small tasks around the house. Sarah and Michael have tried to reconcile a few times, usually around holidays or when their own financial pressures mount. Their calls follow a predictable pattern: fake concern for my health, casual questions about my estate planning, and increasingly desperate hints about their money troubles. I listen politely and give them nothing. They taught me an invaluable lesson that week. When people show you who they really are, believe them. They showed me they valued my money more than my life, my assets more than my love. I believed them, and I acted accordingly. The irony is that by trying to steal my independence, they gave me the greatest gift of all, the freedom to live my life entirely on my own terms. I owe them thanks for that, though I'll never give it. To them, some bridges once burned should stay that way. Some lessons once learned should never be forgotten. And some 74-year-old women are much stronger than their children ever imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.